All right, here to analyze it all is our front bench. With me this evening, former BC Premier Christy Clark. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. CTV News political analyst and former Toronto Mayor John Tory is with us, as is former NDP leader and CTV News political analyst Tom Mulcair. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Happy Thursday. Didn't think I'd be saying wacko so many times ever in my life. Christy, what did you think of how things unfolded this week?
Well, I thought it was well planned on the Conservatives' part. I mean, okay, first of all, the government called the Conservatives spineless, which I guess is okay in the House of Commons, but wacko is not okay. I don't understand that. But I do think that the Conservatives would certainly have planned to get kicked out of the House at some point. They wanted to. People do this sometimes. I remember John Baird, one of my brilliant colleagues in Ontario, interrupting the government's budget speech with liar, this drumbeat of liar, until he finally got kicked out. So it's real, true political theater. It's oldest trick in the books. I'm not sure why wacko is worse than spineless, but I think the Liberals' response to it has been politically incredibly quick and very smart, comparing him to Donald Trump. I mean, and the reason that's dangerous or very helpful for the Liberals is because I think a lot of Canadians, no matter who they're voting for, really don't want Donald Trump-style politics to find its way north of the border. And their one hope to peel off lots of those kind of blue Liberal voters who are now going with Pierre Poilievre is to get them back to their party by convincing them that Pierre Poilievre is too crazy, too conservative, too Trumpian, and will do too much damage to Canadian politics.
And we've talked about that in a few other instances, John, because they had appeared to kind of back off of that comparison following the official kickoff to the U.S. campaign when they launched their own Team Canada strategy. And you could tell needed to actually sort of, engage with people who are associated with Trump. But in this instance, it was almost like they were handed something that they couldn't turn away from, in a way it felt. And that, 12-second ad, I'm wondering whether you think it will be effective.
Oh, probably. And I think it's certainly better than them directly invoking his name, because I think they were finding that to be kind of very limited in terms of its usefulness. But I agree with every word that Christy said in terms of the whole thing. I guess what I only want to add to that is that to me, it's very sad. It's very sad that that's the level of discourse we have in the House of Commons on an issue that is taking thousands of lives. I mean, the issue itself isn't, but the question of what to do about thousands of lives being lost across the country is treated in that manner. It's a total political football. And, I lived through this as mayor. Christy in Vancouver had to live through this in British Columbia. And you just have to walk down the streets, which I've done in both cities recently, to see the tragedy that's in the streets. And that's what we end up having now. It's been a little better the last couple of days, but it took this sideshow, to get us there. And I think a lot of it was political theater. And the very fact they sent out fundraising emails, all of them afterwards, is proof of that. And it's just sad.
The only thing I would jump off that point with, Tom, is, you and I spoke right after it happened on TV on Tuesday when it was all still fresh. Less than 24 hours later, and John referenced this, but the QP that followed that original one yesterday, for example, was like it was like you weren't even watching the same people. It was a completely somber tone. It was very serious. It was like as if the last 24 hours hadn't even happened. Why do you think that was?
I think that the very smart people around Poilievre put their hands on his shoulders, sat him down and said, look, you're doing great. You're 21 points ahead of the Liberals. It's because of your energy, your way of going at issues. That works. But you've got to be careful because it's a fragile lead that you have right now. People are watching you now. The Conservative base is going to vote for him come hell or high water. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, what do we do with the other ones who are softer Conservatives? They were fed up with the Liberals' incompetence on the economy. They're looking at the Conservatives. They're telling pollsters they'll vote for them, but it's not yet set in stone. And that's what Poilievre has been told to be very careful about. So I think that John is right. There's a fine line here. I've been in any number of set-tos. Believe me, I'm not here to throw the first stone at anybody. I did 3 terms in Quebec City, which is very raucous as a legislature. But there is a line that you can't cross. And I think that he was reeled back in. It was almost too much. It was John Ivison in the National Post today who said he looked like he had been shot with a horse tranquilizer, Poilievre. So, yeah, a big change in tone because he's trying to settle down. He wants to stay the same strong personality, but there's a big difference between being unfettered and being unhinged. And he looked, to some to be that way. I would also add, as we've talked about this as well, that I think there'll be a moment of reckoning for Greg Fergus, who I think is going to have a heck of a hard time staying in that chair.
Yeah, your comments on that went viral, Tom. Just to jump off what Tom said, though, and add some data to the conversation, Leger has a new poll out this week, and I can just pull it up on the screen for our viewers as well, because it does show that though the Conservatives, to be clear, in every poll that we can see right now, are far out ahead of the Liberals, in most cases by about 20 points, the softness of their vote, this is what Leger asked, are you likely to change parties? Like, are you willing to look elsewhere? How cemented are you to this vote? The portion of Conservatives who were likely to change parties was at 21%, the NDP at 17%, the Liberals at 8%. And this part of it was, I think, most instructive when you're looking at everyone's strategy going forward. The factors that will influence the change in political support, mistakes by a party leader, and if we could just pull that one up now, 30% of Conservatives said that would be the biggest determinant of whether or not they did end up changing their vote. What if you were in Poilievre's, world right now, Christy? What would you infer from that?
Well, I mean, you look at the Liberals, 15%. Only 15% will change if the leader made a mistake. I mean, if you're still voting Liberal, you're okay with mistakes from the federal Liberal government. That's one of the things I took from it. But certainly on, what they've got to show is they've got to get the Conservatives to make mistakes. They've got to get Poilievre to make mistakes. And the challenge that he's got ahead of him is not that people don't like Trudeau, not that people are fed up with the way the economy's been handled. The problem that he has is that he's got to look like he's prime ministerial material. And that's not something he's really started to focus on yet. I think it's perfectly possible he'll find his way there, but he's not there yet. And all the yelling and screaming in the House of Commons doesn't add to the idea that he's ready to be a sober, reasonable leader of Canada, going to unite the country, going to bring us together around common issues and do it in a way that really demonstrates a depth of understanding his issues. Just yelling and calling people names in the House of Commons mostly makes people think of that particular politician is maybe good at being in opposition, but probably not ready for government. And that's the next step he needs to take.
What's your sense of that, John? I know that the Liberals were talking, every response in the House of Commons this week focused on, for example, his lack of a willingness, it appeared, to distance himself unequivocally from Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist who offered an endorsement of what Pierre Poilievre says. I mean, his office did release a statement basically saying we don't follow what that American does, but there was no real unequivocal denouncement of that. Does stuff like that in the long term potentially hurt Mr. Poilievre?
I don't think it helps because I think, as Tom said, now the focus is shifting. I think it's shifted more in some respects with the public, who are kind of knowing that they don't want to re-elect the government at this moment, but they're sort of just watching carefully to see, who it is. They do that sort of who's worst, who's next, and who's left, kind of thing. And they're watching carefully to see this person that they're saying they're voting for at the moment, the Conservatives, is how he's behaving. And, I also think that, to Christy's point, maybe the time is there, and I don't say this just to flatter him because he's on TV, but Tom Mulcair, I remember very well, relied on skillful cross-examination in the House instead of all the histrionics and name-calling. And I'm sure he had his days where he was called into question by the Speaker too, but most of the time it was just skillful cross-examination. You can make your point without calling names. People do it in court every day. They're not allowed to call names in court. Lawyers aren't. So I just think he's got to really be careful and kind of stay the course, be tough and be critical and ask the questions, but do it in a way that is civilized and prime ministerial.
Mm-hmm.
I might be the skeptic among the group, Tom, but I think also we can't discount, and we'll talk more about this in the next segment, but the degree to which support bases are motivated by what they see on social media. And often what they see are just a snippet of the conduct of someone in the House of Commons. The Conservatives do this, more than anyone, but other parties do it as well, right? They take just that clip, they put it out on social media, and they use that to fundraise off of or to garner more support, essentially. In that context, do you anticipate, though, that behavior will really change that much? I don't know where John just went, but...
I'm not convinced that social media changes votes that much. I think it reassures bases and people see what they want to see and they get comforted in their point of view. I do have it on good authority from inside the Conservatives that the fundraising they did after Tuesday, and they went for a small amount, I believe it was $35 was the top line request. So basically they were trying to hit their base and trying to build their lists, and apparently it was spectacularly successful in favor of the Conservative fundraising effort. But you're completely right. I mean, the average voting public is going to get their information from different sources. Younger people who tend to be flocking towards the Conservatives and Mr. Poilievre, contrary to any prediction anybody would have made a year and a half ago, they're going to be watching social media more. The Trump comparison, I think, is aptly done by quoting Trump rather than hitting this thing too hard over the head. And it becomes a question of character. And character does move votes. And that's why Mr. Poilievre has to be so careful.